Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
My name is Clancy Imislund, and I'm an alcoholic. When I saw in the program they're going to have someone introduce me, I wasn't quite looking for that. I thought he'd say, and this wonderful saint-like man who was joining me. But I just discovered that alcohol can remove my clothes. I already knew that. But I'm very glad to be here this morning. I want to thank Jerry for taking good care of my family, and Carol for taking good care of my wife. I've been ill. I had to go home from work last week ill, and I've been home all weekend ill, which is very unlike me. I never get sick, and just a queasy stomach, a little touch of flu, I guess. So the dogs and I have stayed home and shared. I gave them a bunch of crap, and they gave me a bunch of crap. Well, anyway. But I'm very glad I feel better today. I got enough rest. I really feel pretty good now. I'm glad to be here this morning. Someone asked me why David, the coordinator, why he and I had hugged when he was up here giving an announcement. He and I earlier this morning had co-hosted a seminar on temper management, and we were congratulating each other on what a good job we had done. Very good. But this is Memorial Day. It's been mentioned, and a few of us tattered old World War II veterans got up. And it's always a touching day to me because we live in Santa Monica, or West LA, right by the big veteran cemetery. And every year on Memorial Day, I take my children up and my wife, and we go through the cemetery and look at the people who died from the Civil War and the Spanish-American War. And they are not always fascinated by it, never were much, but it's always very touching. If you ever get a chance to go by there, they've laid out the flags in perfect diagonals and orders. It's just a beautiful sight. And acres of little flags, and everyone represented a dead guy buried there, of course. And kind of touching, a couple of years ago, my oldest daughter, who is now about 50 or so, down in Albuquerque, she called me up. She said, I just saw Saving Private Ryan, she said, and this is the first time I understood why you take us to the cemetery every year on Memorial Day. And I was thinking about Memorial Day as a touching day to me, and a lot of my friends are dead. Well, I guess they'd be dead anyway. I just happened to think of that. I'm going to get somebody else's notes here. I was reading in the paper the other day that alcohol removes stains from clothes. No, that's not right. During the countdown by that guy in the cap, remember in the book it says, if you're able to stop drinking or keep drinking, our hats are off to you. He was talking about you. Anyway, he asked in a kind of a facetious manner whether there'd be anybody 65 years sober here. Of course, there wouldn't be. Could you stop and think 65 years ago today, Bill Wilson was staying in Dr. Bob's house in Akron. Dr. Bob was 4 days sober, 3 days sober, and they were discussing spiritual matters, deep spiritual matters, as both members of the Oxford group. And they talked about the spirituality, and Bill had talked about the spiritual experience he'd had in New York. And Dr. Bob was eager because it was the first time he'd identified. Last week I was talking to Dr. Bob's son. Some of you know him, but he and I were having a cup of coffee, and we talked about that again, about how when he drove his father out to meet Bill Wilson, he said, his father said, "I'll give this guy 15 minutes, but I'm too sick to sit through much more lectures." And instead he went in there, and the first thing Bill Wilson said to him was, I don't know very many people know this, the first thing he said was, "You sure need a drink, don't you?" And the guy, "How did you know?" And they went in and talked for hours and came out, and Bill moved into his house. And they stayed there, and they thought that maybe this Oxford movement could keep these people sober. And a few days later, of course, Dr. Bob was feeling better, and he decided to go to the American Medical Association convention in New Jersey, Atlantic City, and tell them about this thing he'd found. And on the way to the convention, he got drunk and stayed drunk. And on the next morning, Monday morning, Dr. Bob's office nurse called Mrs. Smith at home. She said, "I have some very bad news. They delivered the doctor this morning on the station platform down in Akron. He's so drunk he couldn't walk." And I came down to get him, and I take him here. He's laying on the floor of the office, and I don't know what to do, and I'm so sorry. And so she got Bill, who was staying at their house, and they went down to get him and brought him home, and sick and desperate and hopeless, and the big dream they had for all of us was extinguished. And finally one day, a day or so, Dr. Bob woke up. He said, "Oh my God, I'm so sick and I'm so sorry." He said, "What day is it?" He says, "Wednesday, Bob." "Oh my God." He said, I've got to do a cancer surgery today. Look at my hand. I can't do a cancer surgery. My God, what am I going to do? And so Bill bought him a drink. And he bought him a drink and steadied his hand. He went down to this cancer surgery. And when he put down the knife and put down that glass that day, that turned out to be the birth of Alcoholics Anonymous. It was June 10th, 1935, as most of us all know. And since then, there's been a place for people like us to go. For many, many years, very many people didn't know about it. But now it's all over the world. In the last couple of years, I've been asked to come and speak in AA meetings in exotic places like Cape Town and Oslo and Dublin and Belfast. A couple of weeks ago, I was in Australia for their national convention. And all over the world, AA is everywhere. Al-Anon is everywhere. Al-Anon is doing a good job. AA is doing a good job. And so there's no need for people like us to have to die drunk anymore. That's a great blessing. There's just one little cloud here. And that little cloud is in America, where there's more sobriety than any place in the history of the world. There's more people in this section sober than were sober in the world in 1940. In this America, where there's sobriety everywhere, and AA everywhere, it is estimated that about 95% of alcoholics still die drunk. Many of the people in this room today who are sober and feeling well will die drunk. Not because AA doesn't work, but because of the sinister nature of the illness that makes people like us listen to the mind telling us things that we know better than, but we follow it anyway. To follow those emotions, those terrible emotions that make us feel, but my case is different. They don't understand, but people don't really know. And I go to AA and they talk about God. That's not an answer. I have to find something else. And they go into all sorts of things. Now, of course, it's a Prozac thing in the country. So many places people are just loaded on all the various things. And now they're starting to produce for the first time. The magazines are coming out showing the negative results of Prozacs, the suicides, the deaths, the craziness, the terrible addiction. They can't get them off again because it's so addictive. But and why would that be? Why would we not accept this? I'll tell you something. I am not a believer in pain for myself. I don't mind pain for you. But I'm not a believer in pain. I am not a masochist. I hate physical pain. I hate mental pain. I hate psychological pain. So I have to think to myself, knowing this, why did I come to AA where there's a chance to get rid of pain and then slip? Year after 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 year. Come as kind of doing fairly well AA, and then a medium bottom AA, and eventually standing outside of a Skid Row mission downtown, without front teeth, without clothing, without anything. And if some guy would have come up to me that morning and said, Slim, you're dying. You're dying. Now, you've been in and out of AA for almost 10 years. You've lost your wife and children. You'll never see them again. You've lost your home. You've lost your career. Once upon a time, a guy called you a boy genius. Now you can't even get a job washing dishes. You've lost all your clothing, apparently in Phoenix, where the guy kicked your teeth out in the jail. You're not allowed to call your mother. Your mother won't collect phone calls from you anymore. She would, but your stepfather intercepts them. Now, why don't you go back to AA one more time and admit you're an alcoholic and do something about it before you die? And if someone had said that to me, and if I were in a mood to be honest, I'd have had to tell him, pal, you just don't understand. I'm not really an alcoholic. Don't misunderstand me. I know there's something wrong with me. I've known it since I was a little boy. There's something missing in me. There's something that I don't have enough confidence, or there's something absent. I don't fit in well. I don't seem to get along. I can't maintain close relationships with people very well. There's something awkward about me and ill at ease. I don't have the grace other people have. And over the years, I went to psychiatrists, and I read books, and I did all sorts of things. But the only answer I ever found was when I was a boy, again, early in the Second World War, when I already 15 years old and nervous and irritable and discontent, restless, uncomfortable. I told my mother I was going to Superior, Wisconsin to visit my aunt. She packed my little bag and gave me bus fare, and I took that money and hitchhiked to San Francisco. And got to San Francisco, and I was going to be in the Marine Corps or something. But some guy gave me a ride all the way from Minneapolis to San Francisco, or else I never would have made it. I was so dumb I can't believe it. And he said, you probably won't get the Marine Corps, kid, because you look you're this high and you got a pimply face, but they're crying for merchant seamen. Go down and see if you can get papers from the Coast Guard. He showed me how to do that. So I went in there. I want seaman's papers. I put down 16 instead of 15. He told me to do that. I said, well, you're only 15 years old, 16 years old. You have to have your parents' permission. So I took it around the block, got my parents' permission. And they were really crying for seamen. And that day, they sent me to the National Maritime Union, where I signed the waiver for some union dues. And they sent me to the dock. And that afternoon, I was on a ship going to the South Pacific. It was kind of fun for about the first couple hours. There was Treasure Island, and there was Alcatraz and Golden Gate. And all of a sudden, the ship kept going. And I think I had an intuitive feeling that I'd made the first in an endless series of career mistakes. And I was stuck in a room, they called them forecastles, with 3 of the worst type of people you could be with. These guys are called men. And they just, what are you supposed to be, kid? And we had a terrible time, but I adjusted finally. They were the scum of the earth. All the good sailors had gone in the Navy by this time. The war was on. And these were the scum of the earth, just terrible, vicious. I'm not trying to offend anybody, but I got to tell you this. You can't hardly pick up a paper these days without finding new cases of childhood abuse, of kids being abused by their clergymen or by their parents or by babysitters. It's just all continual sexual abuse. And I think about that. This dumb 15-year-old, dumb kid hitchhiking all the way across the country and getting on ships with the scum of the earth and never abused once. It makes you feel unattractive. Anyway. But on that ship, one of the things they did for me, they got me to drink some whiskey. And they just did it for a laugh because I was a dumb kid. How about you, Junior? Think you're man enough for a little snort? But I was raised in a Norwegian Lutheran church. I was nervous and irritable and discontent, but I was religious. And I was overcome. I was just preparing to tell him, how dare you stick that bottle in my face? I could see he had black hair. I thought, this must be one of the Catholics I've heard about. I was going to say, I'm a Norwegian Lutheran. Don't you dare put that bottle in my face. I'm not that type of person. I was just about to lay that on him. He said, well, how about it, Junior? You think you're man enough? And I heard a voice say, goddamn right. And I had my first drink of whiskey as we were coming into Pearl Harbor. In fact, it's a funny thing. I see old Frank sitting there. A few years ago, I was asked to come and speak at the Pearl Harbor Naval Hospital. And I stayed at Frank's apartment, sumptuous apartment, very lovely. Too good for him, by far. But he puts you on the bed, and there's a big bay window right next to you. And you wake up in the morning and you think you're falling. Oh, Jesus! But anyway, from where I spoke in the hospital, Frank was with us. Where I spoke in the hospital, I could look out and see where I had my first drink. Where I'd held drinks before that, but I threw them up. That's the first time I held a drink down. And it was such a touching moment. That had been, God, in the early 1940s. And here I was, a lot older. Almost 30. Almost 70. But anyway, it was when I held that drink down, I couldn't breathe. It was just terrible. And then all of a sudden, I had a funny feeling. All of a sudden, I felt significantly better. And I suppose the best way to describe that's the first time I ever felt the way men looked. And I just felt good. And later on, a couple of days later, I got drunk in Pearl Harbor. They gave me a lot of beer in Honolulu, and I got drunk. And I didn't become an alcoholic. I learned to smoke on that ship. Nobody that I knew smoked. But they all smoked, so I smoked and puked and smoked and puked and smoked till I didn't puke and smoked 2.5 or 3 packs a day every day for the next 40-some years. And later on I got in another ship. Then later on I got in the Navy. And did the wars, the Naval Hospital up in Northern California, and they passed around some tests. I've always been good on tests. So I did very well, and I got a job. They gave me a high school diploma, so I was able to go back to college after the war. 1946, beginning class of veterans. Very few of you are old enough to remember this, but a remarkable time, because only time in American history, before or since, where millions of veterans all got out of college at once, or out of the service at once, and they all had the GI Bill. So a lot of them could go to college, and they didn't want to stay in college. They just went there to get something to do, And you'd find some grizzled old sergeant sitting next to a little girl just out of Plum City High School. Were you in the war? Yeah, you put out. It was just terrible. I was shocked. But I got married in college. That girl sitting down there. Black hair, cold black eyes, flashing charm. I never saw anything like that in the Norwegian Lutheran Church. And after she won my heart, she dropped a bombshell. She said, I'm a Catholic. And I tried to escape, but she had me in her net somehow. And we got married, and I'm out in the world. Worked here and there, advertising, eventually public relations. And my wife began to manifest the habits of good Catholic girls. Lutherans never know about them, but you hear about it later. They seem to have a lot of children. And I became a national distributor of small Catholics. Just boom. There's one sitting there from Dallas. What are you doing here? And tried to get better jobs. And all these years I drank and caroused and smoked and drank, and all the things that's what I thought creative people did. And I'd lose a job and get another job, and I'd leave a town and get another job, and terrible things would happen, and I'd leave a town. I remember one night, right before Christmas, in the city where I was working, a dear friend of mine, he was, I don't know if I ever talked about this, whenever you think about it, but we'd seen him in a store. I went to the store to get some cheese, and this clerk was there. I said, how's this cheese? He says, it has a remarkable authority. I thought, what's this clerk talking like that for, this goof? And I got talking to him, and it turned out that he'd just been expelled from medical school at the University of Wisconsin because he was a homosexual. In those days, it was not accepted anywhere. And so we got quite friendly. He became a friend of my wife and I, and we had him to dinner, and we went to his house. And I directed the local theater there, and I put him in a couple plays and got him intimate with the leading lady one night in an effort to straighten out his life. And he was going to help me with my drinking. I was going to help him with his homosexuality. When he felt homosexual, I'd try to do something to get his mind off it. When I was going to drink, he'd help me to do something to get my mind off it. One day I got drunk again, and he was heart sick. And remember, he said, Clancy, how could you? And when you're full of guilt, you just lash out. You say, oh, get away from me. God damn it. I don't want queers around me. Leave me alone. I don't know why I said it. Just because it's nasty. And he went home that night and committed suicide. And they called us the next morning. I was almost crazed, and I fled town shortly thereafter. I just gave whatever money I had to my wife, and I hitchhiked to San Francisco again. It's a little different now when you're old and it's wintertime. But I did it. I started over again and got another start. Pretty soon I was in the faculty of the University of Texas, directing the Grand Opera. And then pretty soon I was in the Texas Insane Asylum, directing a Christmas pageant. I was just coming off electric shock, so I wasn't quite as slick as I usually was. The director's main job, as I've often said, is, and it wasn't a very intricate production. The director's main job was trying to keep the three wise men off the Virgin Mary, if you possibly could. You know. Get back there, Lamar. Just want to hip her. And I got out of there just on and on like this. And I went to AA because some people thought I had a drinking problem. But after I went to AA for a while, I realized I don't have a drinking problem. I have a feeling problem. Drinking makes me feel better. I have to find a way to control it. I didn't realize, and somebody gave me that book, and I read that book in the early 1950s, and there's a perfect description of me in that book, and I never examined it once. It was read this morning, that thing in chapter 3, a perfect description. My whole life has been an obsession that somehow, someday, I will control and enjoy my drinking. It says the persistence of this illusion is astonishing. There's occasional brief recoveries followed always still by worse relapse. And then occasional pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization, and then get better and do it again. And know that, but I'm not really an alcoholic because my problem really isn't alcohol. The best way I could describe it is what's my Thomas thing? If you understand this, it's like having an abscessed tooth and you're getting a little reaction to Novocaine. Shall I join Novocaine Anonymous? That's not the problem. It's this damn tooth. And so I went to jail sometimes, and I got to hospitals, locked up. When one of my daughters was born, our second daughter was born, our third daughter was born, my wife was working in the hospital as a nurse. And she went into the hospital and had a baby. Fortunately, I'd got there the night before and was chained down on another floor. And so when she came by to have her baby, they brought her by, and I remember her standing at the door and pointing at me. She didn't, but the other nurses did. She always... It was St. Charlotte and the Beast. Well, it was valid, but I didn't like it anyway. But eventually it all blew up again one more time. And I stood in a street corner with everything gone. And if someone said to me, you're an alcoholic, I'd have to say, I'm not an alcoholic. And he might have said, well, prove you're not an alcoholic. And I couldn't have done that. I wouldn't have had the ability to stand back and delineate my emotions. So I would have to do what people like me, and I'm sure like many of you do, when you get cornered and the heat is on. You say things like, oh, leave me alone. Just get away from me. To hell with you. Because I don't know what else to say. And I stood in the street corner, in a cold rainy day. I'd been in Los Angeles, 2-3 weeks. I'd gotten some money from one guy that I had known in Texas, and I'd spent that, and I'd been to an AA club and alienated them, gave them a lecture on their stupidity. And there was no place to turn. And I would have bet my life that moment, and did bet my life, that there was no help for people like me. I'd been in psychoanalysis. I'd read books. I read philosophy. Probably the biggest problem I had, one of the great problems I always had with AA, and I'm sure other people have it too, is that when you've been raised in a strong religion and you go someplace where they're talking about God, you know that you're screwed. Because if God exists, I am damned. There's no doubt about that. You know, in the Norwegian Lutheran Church, I'm sure, maybe it wasn't this way, but it seemed that way to me. If you break 2 or 3 commandments, you're in trouble. If you break all 10, there's no hope. And I had broken all 10. Accidentally a couple times, but I broke them. And it wasn't until I was sober 2 or 3 years that I realized that I hadn't broken all 10 commandments. I've never coveted my neighbor's manservant. I said that one night in West Hollywood, and the guy in the front row said, "I did." You know. But it's easy to joke about, but it isn't funny when you are the one that you know is damned. And to go back to AA one more time and have them say, "If you just return to God." But I had to get off that street corner, so I walked. I said, "Where is this Wilshire and Fairfax?" And he said, "Wilshire doesn't come down this far. You have to go up this hill to Hill Street and then cut over to Wilshire and then go out." And I walked. There was 72 long blocks. And I was cold and sick and desperate and no front teeth. And someone asked me one time in New York, "How could you possibly walk that far when you were so desperate?" The answer is very simple. That's the only time you can. You can't do it unless you're absolutely desperate. And I got to this club and I didn't want to be in there. They weren't glad to see me. And I hung around in the raining and I ate some cake at the meeting, and we talked about gratitude, and it made me want to puke it back up. And that night I had no place to sleep. It was raining. He said, "There's an abandoned car out in the back park. A guy named Joe Quinn here left it a while back. You can sleep in that." I slept in that. And I got up in the morning, and the meeting was Sunday morning, and the spiritual meeting, I ate more cake and listened to God. And I really thought I was dying. Maybe dead for all I knew. And I had no idea that would be my sobriety date. Anymore, I suppose, than Dr. Bob felt that'd be a sobriety date and we put down a drink, or any one of us on our own sobriety date. You don't really have the ability to foresee the future. It just seems to be another in an endless chain of defeats and no place to turn, and nobody understands, and my case is different, and why doesn't anybody know that? Now you'd think, well, that's easy for you when you're on Skid Row to have those feelings. Nah. I've had the chance to sponsor a lot of people over the years. I put the flag on the moon, and guy that made $6 million already this year, and other people. And they all have the same feeling eventually. That's what's so odd about it. Pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization is not a product of poverty. It is a product of emotional bankruptcy when there's no place to turn. And I hung around that. And I've many, many times thought, what was different this time? What was different? You know, I've talked about this before, but you know who I'm sorry we don't have any authority speakers this weekend in this convention. I mean, they're all great speakers, and I sponsor some of them, but I know the others intimately. But there are no authorities. Authorities in AA are people who come from a long ways away. When you have a convention, you bring people in from New York and Georgia and Florida, like the Al-Anons did. Bring in authorities. When they have conventions in New York, they bring in people from California. When they have speakers in Georgia, they bring them, far away you're an authority. I'm kind of an authority in Toronto. I'm a minor authority because I go there every year and one day a year, and I speak in the morning on some subject, the history of AA or the steps of the traditions. In the afternoon, they have a question and answer meeting. Then at night, I tell my story. And I was up there talking a few years ago, and I like these question and answer meetings because I've discovered I have a facility to weave a tapestry of verbal BS while I think of the answer. And this woman in the back said, "Clancy, I have a question, and if you don't mind, I wouldn't like one of your long answers." Somebody ought to pull her hair. I said, "Yes." She says, "Every year we hear you slipped forever, and now you've been sober forever. You get more wonderful apparently every year. What was the difference? What was it? We never hear what was the difference." And I could, just a sentence or two, she said. I can't give an answer like that in a sentence or two. My God, that's a very complex subject. I said, I really can't answer that, ma'am. I'm sorry. Not in a sentence or two. I'd like to, but I thought to myself, I'm going to go back there and pull your nose is what I'd like to do. She broke my rhythm. And that night I was taking a shower before the meeting. I was going to give my talk, and suddenly an answer came. The answer, but then I thought I couldn't have given it to her because it didn't make sense. It's a stupid answer. I hate little, terrible answers. I like answers with a little body, with a little panache, with a little zip. I'd like to have the new people here today, incidentally, all who look better than I do. I'd have the new people leave here today and say things like, did you hear what Clancy said? Wet birds don't fly at night. Did you hear what Clancy said? Never mind if the horse is blind, keep loading the wagon. These answers mean nothing, but they give the newcomer hope. The answer I thought of this time, I thought that night, that I guess it's the correct answer, tawdry as it is. This was the first time I ever seemed to be so emotionally drained that I was willing to do things I absolutely disagreed with and hated. I didn't do it to stay sober. I did it just so I wouldn't get kicked out of that club in the rain. And I hung around. And I let people put me down. I'm often glad there wasn't anybody there I had to impress. I just gave up. In those days, they didn't have styrofoam cups. They just had porcelain cups at every meeting. And God save. Incidentally, the young lady who had the longest sobriety here today, 7 years, she was an old timer around the Beverly Hills group, and I used to go there and skulk looking for wealthy sponsors. You could have been my sponsor if you had dough. Anyway. She said, oh. But today, all right, we need somebody to do the dishes. How about you without the teeth, kid? Ordinarily, I'd say, no. But, okay. Come on, we need some help setting up this meeting. You without the teeth, you want to help us? It's just terrible, just hideous. And I started doing these things and I stayed sober and eventually fell into that other trap of getting a sponsor. Get a sponsor! I had sponsors. I saw this guy who used to come in, he was an actor in the movies and he played loving roles and always giving people money in the movies. Now, I'll get him. Maybe I can get some front teeth, get out of here, get to New York, get a job, have a life before I die. Hey, Bob, would you be my sponsor? Sure, son. But I want you to do what I say. Oh, sure, Bob. I want sobriety on an all-time basis. I've often thought he should have won the Academy Award for every loving role he ever played, because they were foreign to his nature, I'll tell you. He turned out to be a right-wing fascist AA pig. And worse than that, a dictator-type sponsor. They shouldn't allow people in AA dictators. I guess the word got down here, too. I'll tell you something funny about dictatorship-type sponsors, though, folks. And it's just this. A dictatorship-type sponsor is absolutely impossible in AA without the absolute cooperation of the dictatee. All he ever has to say is, screw you. And the dictatorship is over. That's why I've often thought it would be nice if we had AA police. Could come at night and say, did you say screw you to your sponsor? We're going to send you to Akron for a little re-education. And he'd get me to take actions, and I did them. I've often wondered, why would I take that? Because he gave me what seemed to me to be crap. And I never took crap from anybody. I've quit good jobs because people gave me crap. And I don't know how many times in bars people would say, I don't think you're so much. You don't think so? You try me. Come on. And I get knocked on my can a lot, but they know I'm tough. I don't take any crap from anybody much of my life. And it wasn't until I was sober a while that I realized why that was. Is because all my life I secretly knew I was a weakling. And I hate it. I hate myself for being a weakling, and I hate being weaklings, and no one's ever going to find out I'm a weakling if I got to fight every night, and if I got to quit jobs, I got to do everything. I'm not going to take any crap from anybody. It's a funny thing when you stay around AA somehow and do these things, a strange things happens. You little by little become strong, like you've always wanted to be, and then you can afford to be weak. But you can't afford to be weak when you're weak. You have to be strong when you're weak. But why would I take this stuff from him? I'll tell you why. Because I guess it was that somehow I felt that he was the first person I ever knew that knew how I felt. I'm sure there are a lot of people in AA that I talked to over the years who knew how they felt, but I would never let them in. Somehow I had the feeling down deep that he somehow knew how I felt and understood me. And what a difference that makes. I'll tell you what the difference is this. There isn't a person in this room who hasn't had enough advice to last him 1,000 years from everybody, parents and teachers and doctors and ministers, and we've all had advice up the yin-yang. But it just, after all, it's just so much information, and the answer is quite simple. I know you don't say it, but you think it. I know you mean well, but you can't possibly know how I feel. You're giving me advice that would fit someone like you, but I'm not like you. You don't understand. People come up and say, I know how you feel. You just want to say, no, you don't know how I feel. And the odd thing about AA is that if you can stay here and do these things a while, somebody may come up to you one day, some old fool will say, I know how you feel. And you think, my God, he does know how I feel. And when that moment comes, that is the conception of sobriety, I believe. Because then, if you can believe that he or she knows how you feel, when they tell you something, I may listen to it and follow it. It goes from information to advice. Meaningful advice. And I didn't take much advice. I still couldn't take much, but I took a little. And I would do things to please him that I wouldn't do. But the one thing I couldn't overcome ever. But eventually, sooner or later, no matter how you're doing, here they come with God again, and then I'm euchred. And I remember one night I was at a... That's my great-grandson making that noise. I don't mind. It's okay. When I was your age, I was in the reformatory. This is really a terrible thing. I've got a wife and a daughter and a granddaughter and a grandson and a great-grandson, all of them taking notes. So they can blackmail me around Christmas, I suppose. But anyway, then I could take action. And that is what makes the difference. You know, go back to Dr. Bob and Bill. When Dr. Bob got drunk and they got sober again, that's what changed in their relationship. You know, one thing that changed? Bill Wilson suddenly realized after Bob got drunk that Bill hadn't stayed sober by studying the Oxford movement. He'd stayed sober by trying to help other drunks. And so he said to Bob, let's not talk about spiritual matters anymore. Let's go up and try to help somebody in the hospital. And started the meaning of Alcoholics Anonymous, of getting out of self, of being of service, of doing these things. And little by little taking these actions. And when my sponsor, he was not in a meeting one night, and I'd given him a little lecture on why certain people do not have to accept God and will not return to God. And he nailed me again. So, well, I did another performance last night, I guess. And he said something effective, what's all this crap about you and God? I said, Bob, I cannot take that. I cannot return to God. He says, it doesn't say in any of our steps you return to God. Oh, to a power greater than myself. Does that fool these ignorant people? They don't fool me. I know who they mean. He says, it doesn't say that either. Why don't you just read the parts on the page that are printed there? Try that. He says, you don't think you're an alcoholic. Let's try this. Are you having trouble drinking? Yeah. Are you having trouble staying sober? Yeah. Okay. You've done the first step. You're an alcoholic. Next. And that's really it. In case there's anybody here having trouble thinking you're an alcoholic, wondering how many times you've been in jail or if you've been in the nut house, that isn't what it is. An alcoholic is a person who finds that staying sober is unbearable and drinks to make it better, and then drinking becomes a problem, and now they can't stay sober, they can't drink. That's called alcoholism. That's what an alcoholic is. Very simply. But the second step, I said, I can't return to a higher power. He says, it doesn't say that. He explained. He says, you come to believe in something. You come to believe in a power greater than yourself. You never return to anything in AA because we're coming out of sick perceptions. It's a disease of perception. You come to believe in something. Can't you believe in God? No. He says, you believe in AA? No. He says, you think I'm doing better than you are? Yes. He says, congratulations, I'm your new higher power. And he became my higher power, and I could accept that. He could not send me to hell. Seconds and inches, but he could not send me to hell. And I did things to please that old fool I wouldn't have done for anybody, just so he'd like me. So I don't know why. I used to say around the 6300 Club, there's that crazy bastard thinks his sponsor's God. I didn't think he was God, but I knew who he was. But I'll tell you this, if you're new and you're having trouble with the concept of a power greater than yourself, I would much rather see you believe in your sponsor that you believe in than to pretend to believe in a God you don't believe in. Because you can fool him. No. This is the signal for applause. This is laughter, and this is muffled sobs. But I'd much rather have you, because I'll tell you why you do that. Because you can fool them at 8 o'clock at night in the meeting, but you can't fool that dark at 2 in the morning. And you better have something there you can believe in, I'll tell you. And so he got me to come to accept the fact that I had to come to believe in him and would somehow restore me to sanity, which for me, when I do not drink, it is almost, I drink to induce a changed perception of reality, which almost is a perfect description of psychosis, a changed perception of reality. And so he explained it to me. You are drinking, you are trying to find a way to find a power that will enable you not to have to change, to induce temporary psychosis to stand life, which is a good term for sobriety. And little by little he had me take actions. And actions I didn't believe in. The day I was going to commit suicide, I lost my job as a dishwasher. He used that pain to get me to take an inventory. I swore I've taken my inventory with a psychiatrist. I don't take it with an out-of-work actor. But I heard it was nip and tuck, commit suicide or take an inventory, I tell you. And I was so upset I wrote terrible things I never admitted to. And he gave me a ride from Santa Monica to Oxnard, gave me a flashlight. I said, okay, now read it. And I read it, and it read even worse than I remembered. He's going to make me get out of my car and I have to walk back from Oxnard. We got this. He said, that's all, Bob. So you're done now? I said, yeah. He leaned over and said, that's the best thing you've done since you got sober, kid. I thought it was. I'll tell you something funny. I've taken that trip over 200 times since then on the driver's side. And some other boob over there with the flashlight. Let me explain this part before I read it. It's an interesting thing, and in my opinion, all good inventories contain the same elements. You think they'd be all disparate, but to me, they all contain the same elements, no matter how they're written. The specifics vary, but they all contain lack of self-worth, guilt, fear, a lot of resentment, and occasional lashing out at the world to punish them for hurting me. And a few years ago, I listened to the daughter of one of the most famous men in the 20th century, and a week later, with a guy named Ramon Pena, just out of the Washington State Penitentiary. Absolutely different in every respect, except they had the same elements. And that's why AA works so well all over the world, wherever you go, because it is made up of dealing with emotions at a level you cannot consciously see or deal with yourself. It has to continue to do this. This is great-grandfather saying, enough is enough. Isn't he cute? His name is Liam. He's 14 years old. I don't know. Don't ever play this tape for that kid ever. Anyway, but you know, I say AA is the same all over the world. Y'all, you know what AA is like all over the world? You think it'd be all exotic and different, and it really isn't. It's just like it is here. In every group, except for the accents, in every group, there's a group of people who have come to AA through one way or another, have been led into taking actions they didn't agree with. And their perceptions have changed, and they're now staying sober. And they're going to the meetings on a continuing basis. Then there's a group in every group of people who cannot or will not take the actions, who ridicule the people who do, who create dissension, occasionally slip and come back. And then there's the new people. And both of these groups fight for their souls. And it's amazing we keep as many as we do, because the arguments against AA intellectually are the arguments better than the arguments for it. They can prove that this is just a cult of group nonsense. And all we can say is, I don't know why, but it works. It has changed my perception of reality, and people will never believe that until it happens to them. It's like learning how to ride a bicycle. I like that analogy of getting on a bicycle and falling down and saying, I can't ride a bicycle. But if you keep trying, one day you get a sense of balance. And you can't explain how you did it. You don't know how you did it. And you cannot convey that ability to someone for whom you would give your life. When Liam is 10 years old, I would perhaps give my life for that boy. But I could not teach him how to ride a bicycle. He has to get on and do it himself. And that's the way it is with sobriety. You must take the actions here in order to get this sense of balance. And you can't describe it and you can't explain it, except it does happen. So you must somehow believe there are people here who know how you feel and have been where you are. That is what makes AA work. It is such a remarkable thing. And that's why now, 65 years after the man put down that glass of booze and put down his knife without any anticipation of what's going on, we gather together, and it's just another big 3,000 group. And next week there'll be another one, big one in Palm Springs, and there'll be 60,000 people in Minneapolis and all over hell. And we just take it for granted without realizing this is the most remarkable miracle in the world. In 1951, 49 years ago, the American Medical Association gave us the Lasker Awards, the most remarkable advance in mental health. And that was in 1951, and we've forgotten it entirely. Yeah, it's just AA. I'll go back there someday. Remarkable. The greatest gift, I suppose, is come to understand. You don't have to make it complex. You don't have to read things into it. You don't have to read books written by well-meaning people who are going to add on to Alcoholics Anonymous. You don't have to do these things. The steps mean what they say. They're quite simple. The actions that surround us with people mean what they say. I think the best discussion of that, in 1950, in 1945, Bill introduced the traditions because AA was coming apart. And the membership wouldn't accept it. So he and Dr. Bob, in a last gasp effort to save AA, created a meeting in Cleveland, Ohio on July 4th weekend. It's going to be a one-time affair where people from Los Angeles who hated the AAs in Akron, AAs from Chicago who hated the AAs in New York, people all over everybody's just getting drunk and fighting and having a terrible time, could get together once and realize we're all in the same battle together and we better stay here. And that weekend, I have the tapes of that convention, 1950. The quality is very bad, but it's beautiful. 6 young guys, each took two long-form traditions and got up and described them and got the people to understand these are not rules, we're trying to save our lives. And eventually they voted them in, and the next year they put them in the book, the next printing of the book. But to me, the highlight of that convention, and the highlight of conventions like this, is to come to realize that Dr. Bob was dying of cancer, that he was 15 years sober. And he was dying of cancer. They said, Bob, you probably don't want to die, you want to speak. Oh, yes, I do. He said, next to Bill, I've got the most sobriety in the world. I'm the original first person sober because of Bill. And so that weekend, his son and another guy helped him up to the podium, this tall, gaunt, dying of cancer man. And he said, I want to thank you all for being here. I said, I hope you boys and girls will go back to your communities and tell them what you found, that we're all working together. He said, I want to apologize for my ill health. I've been in bed many of the last few months. He said, I'm happy that some small thing I did a number of years ago helped bring this about. And that meeting wasn't anywhere near as big as this one. But then he said something which to me has always been the Gettysburg Address of Alcoholics Anonymous. Short and succinct and right, tells you, new or old, it tells you exactly why you're here. He said, I would indeed be remiss if I didn't call attention to 2 or 3 things that I think are very important. He said, first of all, remember to keep this program simple. Do not louse it all up with Freudian complexes, which may be of interest to the scientists, but have nothing to do with our work here. Our work here, when reduced to the last, consists of love and service. And we all know what love is, and we all know what service is. And secondly, he said, let us guard that erring member of the tongue and try to use it with kindness and understanding. And we all know what it means. We all know exactly what he's talking about. All of us are very easily pleasant, nice people when things are going our way. But sometimes when we're crossed or we're tired or we're not feeling well. And I did a little bit today already myself, but I've felt badly about it. And I know better, but it makes no difference sometimes. He said, try to use it with kindness and understanding. Finally, he said, let us never be too busy to help the man behind us, to give him a pat on the back when he needs to, take him to a few meetings, because none of us would be here if someone hadn't done it for us. Let us never reach that stage of smug complacency where we are too busy to help our fellow alcoholic. Then he said a few closing remarks, and he sat down, and shortly after he was dead. Now, every time I think about AA, I think about that. What a remarkable thing. A great many things have happened to me in AA. I've learned to accept life. I eventually was able to hold a job when I was 2 years sober at last, for any length of time. I eventually got some front teeth, and I eventually was 5 years sober as director of advertising for a medical corporation. I was 7 years sober. Another guy and I were brought into Hollywood, and we created something called Boss Radio. It became the #1 hard rock station in the world. We all wore shiny suits and said things like, "What's coming on down, baby?" I was 10 years sober. I was downtown doing public relations for oil companies. 15 years sober. I was a marketing director in Beverly Hills. And then in some sort of hideous fit of misjudgment again, I left that job, and for the last 26 years I run the mission on Skid Row that threw me out in 1958. And people say, why would you want to give up your good advertising here to run this mission? And I think, well, for such a significant decrease in salary, I thought it must be spiritual. But it's not a treatment center. I'm not qualified to work in a treatment center. When I go to work tomorrow morning, when I go to work, something will happen to me that doesn't happen to anybody in this room, I'm sure. I'll get out of my car, and I'll step over the bodies of men and women dying of alcoholism to get to my office. When I go home, they'll be out there again. And you say, why don't you help these people? What's the difference between them and me? If God's grace is on everybody, why aren't it for them? They're laying on the same patch of sidewalk that I once upon laid on. Because they were not willing to surrender their judgment of what would be right for them. Just that simple. That's why surrender is so important. And I've live in a house up by the West LA, and my children, my wife returned, and they're all grown up now and doing well. Grandchildren, great-grandchild. Much to my surprise, taking actions that pleased my sponsor got me to believe in AA. And taking actions that pleased AA eventually got me to come to believe in a God that I prayed to earnestly every day for 40 years. And I believe implicitly in the grace of God. And I know that God's grace is always with me, drunk or sober. But if I want to stay sober, I better take actions. God gives me the grace available, but I got to tune in on it. And I don't do it very well because I'm a fallible, emotional human being. But the great gift is this. What we got to remember is this. In this end of this great convention, great speakers, a lot of friendships, a lot of people. You think, boy, I hate to see this end. AA is not ending. AA is just starting out there. This is the end of the pit stop. AA is out there, and that's where we're going to go and run our little race out there and live with a little degree of dignity and try to remember that to keep our program simple and not louse it all up with Freudian complexes, which may be of interest to scientists, have nothing to do with our work here. Our work here consists of love and service. And we must try to remember to watch that, guard that erring member of the tongue and do a better job. And never be too busy, ever, to stop and help the man behind us and give him a pat on the back and take him to a few meetings and never get that stage of smug indifference that will help us forget the great blessing we've gotten here. I'm very happy to be here. I want to say one last thing and then I'm going to sit down. In a carnival, when I was a young man, I screwed around in carnivals a little bit. And I'll tell you how sideshows work. They have stages of a sideshow. First of all, they have somebody come out on the platform and they do a dancer or something that catches attention. And the term for the passersby are called mooches, to get the mooches up to the platform. Then a talker comes out, and the talker talks, stimulates their admiration. And then the talker gets them to, he tries to turn the tip. In other words, to get these mooches to buy a ticket. Don't just stand there, buy a ticket, you mooch. There's a lot more going on inside. Then they go inside, and they, but then they got to get the tent cleared so the next group of mooches can come in. So they have the blow-off man come in, and he gets rid of the mooches. I've been happy today being your blow-off man. Thank you.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think. Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside. Then power it on one short burst and one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. changes. You can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.